on the NewsChannel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you're with us tonight. We're talking about an important and difficult topic. We certainly want to hear from you. But in 24 hours, Tennessee is scheduled to execute an inmate. Governor Bill Lee denied the clemency for Donnie Edward Johnson yesterday. The execution is set for 24 hours from now, tomorrow at 7 o'clock. So we're talking about the death penalty. We're talking about Governor Lee's decision. So we're talking about this case and also the broader issue of the death penalty. And we're happy to have with us Stacy Rector, Executive Director of Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty and a Presbyterian pastor. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So yesterday, Governor Lee denied clemency. What were your thoughts on that? I guess, what were your thoughts?
Well, obviously, I was very disappointed, as I think many were. Governor Lee ran on a platform of criminal justice reform. He is a man of faith. He is a man who has a history of prison ministry. And all of those things, I think, are very important pieces of why many of us thought that perhaps the outcome would be different. So we were very disappointed, recognizing he is a brand new governor. This has come very quickly in his very short tenure, and it's obviously a very, very the most, I would say, difficult decision a governor has to make. I disagree with this decision. I don't think it was the correct decision, but I continue to hope, as Governor Lee learns more about the problems with this system, as he continues on, that perhaps there could be possibilities for different outcomes.
This is such, I guess every case is different.
Right.
This
sure.
case is different in a lot of ways. So Johnson is 68 years old. He was convicted of the 1984 murder of his wife. In a horrible way, suffocating her with a trash bag down her throat.
Yes.
Now, one child, I guess his daughter, has asked the governor to not allow the execution to go forward.
Correct.
The son, as I understand it, wanted the execution to go forward. So you have victims, I guess, victims' families who are on opposite sides here. How tough is all of that? When you hear what he did, boy, that's terrible. It's hard to get past that. But I guess the argument was that he is a changed man since 1984 in prison. He's been a changed man. What about that argument?
Well, I think one of the things, Ben, that you mentioned is important to note here is this division within this family. And that is not necessarily an uncommon thing with the death penalty. And because the process necessarily goes on for decades, you have to deal with so many different moving parts, issues that weren't addressed, and this can go on as Don's has for 30 plus years. Families are under extreme stress. They are trapped. There is so much trauma that is not allowed to be addressed because they're constantly in this process, and it can cause these divisions and rifts. And at a time when families need each other so much, you see this playing out, and it's so painful. Cynthia, his daughter that you referenced, for most of her life, very much wanted to see Don executed. And it was only in 2012 when she finally was able to set up a meeting with him at Riverbend to tell him how he had ruined her life and really help him understand the impact that the murder of her mom had had. She did that and had an experience of forgiveness, in the sense that she recognized that all the anger she was holding in and had toward him was actually causing her a lot of damage psychologically, physically, and otherwise. And so at that point she said, I can't hate you anymore. I can't keep doing this. And that was really the beginning of her healing process. And so for her now, to have finally gotten some peace in her life over these last 6 years, to have this all coming back again, and to have family members not agreeing, and it's just been so difficult, and I think is not necessarily that unusual when you're dealing with the death penalty and what it can do to these families.
And it's one of the reasons, it's one of the arguments I've heard against the death penalty, right? That these things, the appeals keep coming up, and if there were just a final sentence right after this happened of life in prison, this wouldn't keep coming back up.
That is correct.
Is that
yeah, I mean, you have, in Tennessee, you have life sentence, which is a 51-year minimum before you're eligible for parole. It's one of the most extreme life sentences in the country, and you also have life without the possibility of parole in Tennessee, which is exactly that. You do not get out of prison. So given that, and given that those sentences start the minute that trial ends and those family members walk out of that courtroom, and it's not this constant up down, what's going to happen next. And I know there are families who, on both sides of this issue that I've talked to, who have said what we're doing now, regardless of whether you're for the death penalty or not, is damaging to them. And I think that's a really important thing we all have to remember as we talk about this.
And so, as Executive Director of Tennesseans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, what was your journey? How did you come, obviously you're opposed to the death penalty,
yes.
You want alternatives. Kind of how did you come to this place?
Well, I grew up in West Tennessee. The death penalty was not something that was going on in Tennessee. It was a very sort of theoretical thing. And began in college to begin to learn a little bit about criminal justice and thinking about my own theology and understanding of the world and trying to put some things together. And when I went to seminary in Georgia. And it was in the 90s, and Georgia was actively executing people at that time. And so I'm sort of in this process of learning and putting all these pieces together about how the systems work or don't work, as the case may be. And Dead Man Walking, the movie about Sister Helen Prejean, came out during that period of time. And so there was just a lot of wrestling that I was doing about what does my faith lead me to do when we're talking about this ultimate punishment. And for me, I came down on the side of, I believe that Jesus calls us to be merciful and to forgive. And that doesn't mean folks can't be held accountable, but I think it means that we have to provide space for God to use people and to change people, even if that's within prison. And so I moved back here to Tennessee just at the end of 1997, and Tennessee was beginning to have those conversations. There had been, I believe, an election had either just happened or was about to happen, a gubernatorial election. It was the 90s, tough on crime rhetoric was out there, and Tennessee had executed no one since 1960 at that point. And we then moved toward executing Robert Glenn Coe in the year 2000. And so I was sort of, as a young pastor, plopped right into the middle of that discussion, and found myself really becoming more and more convicted that this simply was not the way to go. And then as I began to learn about just how broken the policy is, regardless of sort of your biblical or moral frame, it just doesn't work. It's not serving the people of Tennessee to have this policy. And I'm sure we can talk about the reasons I believe that, but all of that together, plus getting to know some of the folks on death row, getting to meet murder victims' family members, correctional officers, attorneys, judges, people that are directly impacted, I just believe that we can do better than this, and that there are alternatives, and that there are different ways of dealing with the violence and the trauma in our society.
And so you have been out there. You've visited people on death row.
Yes.
You've gotten to know people.
Yes.
And has that, it has obviously impacted your feeling about all of this.
Sure.
And I guess how? You already had an opinion going in. Did it make it stronger? I guess how does that impact it? I think so many people, it is, okay, they support the death penalty, but they're never around it. I mean, it's very easy to say, in some ways, I support the death penalty, and then they're never down there.
Right.
Now, at the same time, these people have done terrible things that are down there, and you're around them, and that's difficult as well. So I guess walk us through that, the whole conflict that you may have with all of that.
Well, when I began, I did visit someone on death row here for 10 years, and I did it through a volunteer visitation program. I was a young pastor and very much believed in Jesus' instructions to tend to the sick and to visit the prisoner, and so I took that very seriously, and that's what I did. I didn't know this individual, had no connection to him at all other than I was matched and began visiting as a pastor. That was in 1999. His name was Steve Henley. He had already been there for 13 years. And Ben, we are, as Sister Helen Prejean says, we're all more than the worst thing we've ever done. I certainly hope that's true. And all of the folks you will meet in prison and on death row are human beings. We like to say that they're not, they're monsters, they're this, they're that, but they're all human beings, fallible, broken people, and that's who you meet there. And for many of these individuals who have been there for decades, there has been time to do some real work, as Don has done, and to really, whether it be through their faith or some other, just the love of other people, that they have become really different folks. So I would say it didn't change my thinking, but it did show me the humanity, the brokenness for sure. I mean, as you said, most of the folks out there, there are potentially, we do have issues of innocence for some of the people there, but most likely committed the crimes for which they are on death row. And so we have to take that very seriously, but also take very seriously, for me, that they are human beings and they're our brothers and sisters, and that they have stories too that need to be heard. Many of them stories of horrific abuse, of addiction, of mental illness, of brain injury. I mean, you go through that list. This adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, that we talk about in Tennessee and that Governor Haslam was very engaged in. You go to death row, most of the people out there, they're going to be at the very high end of those ACE scores. So it didn't change it, it just personalized it in a way that it wasn't before. And
it seemed like for a while, like you said, we hadn't executed in Tennessee somebody for a long period of time.
Right.
Now we're back doing it.
Right.
We've executed, I believe, 4 people here in a fairly...
We've 3, and then if this happens with Don, it will be 4 in the last few months.
So it's happening.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to start taking calls, I promise. Okay, so we'll take a break and then I'll start taking calls. Where do you think we are right now? I mean, do you feel like we're moving more toward more executions and your message is not getting through? Or do you feel like your message is getting through? I mean, I say your message, I mean all that are opposed to the death penalty.
No, it's a bit paradoxical what's going on in Tennessee, because nationally the death penalty is on the decline. Public support's at 40-year lows. Death sentencing is at 40-year lows. That's true here in Tennessee as well. We're sentencing very few people to death. It's becoming geographically an isolated thing, with only 2% of counties in this country responsible for the majority of executions and the majority of death sentencing. States are ending it. Washington State's court ended it there last year. New Hampshire just voted to repeal, and they're now dealing with the governor's veto, and we'll see how that plays out. So it is really diminishing. For Tennessee, we went so long without executing. We have a fairly significant number of people on death row, but most of those individuals were put there in the 80s and the 90s. So it's this odd thing where you have movement away from the death penalty, even among the public here in Tennessee, and even the ways people talk about it, because they recognize there are real problems, the risk of executing innocent people, there's the unfair application, there's the cost of it, all those things. People are getting more educated about that, and yet we're moving to execute. So it's this odd place we're in, but I believe that people are becoming much more educated and aware of just how dysfunctional and broken the system is.
All right, we're going to take a break. Joe, Robert, others, hold on the line. And if you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Want to hear your thoughts. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.